Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one I want to talk about the iPhone 16 Pro Max and how we use it within our professional video production workflow. Now this video isn't just for you if you are a working professional in the filmmaking space. If you're considering just starting video as a hobby, perhaps you want to start a YouTube channel or you just want to capture some more content of your life, I think the iPhone 16 Pro Max and obviously when the iPhone 17 gets released, these are incredible filmmaking tools if you pair them with a few accessories. The thing that I really like about the iPhone in terms of a proposition to get into the filmmaking space is the fact that it's an iPhone and you can often get it on a plan with your mobile carrier. So in New Zealand where we live, there is a carrier called One.nz, it used to be Vodafone, and you can buy this on a plan wrapped up with your normal internet and phone bill. So the access to get a cinema camera in your pocket is basically next to no money. You just got to wrap it up in a monthly plan, and obviously most people get their phones on a plan anyway. So to upgrade to the iPhone 16 Pro Max, given that it's August 2025, is the flagship model to upgrade to. So if that's interesting to you, stick around. We're going to talk about all of these accessories and how we add a few things to this to actually make it very usable within our professional workflow. Just for clarity, we are filming this video right now on the URSA G2, which is a cinema camera, but I will compare the quality of this against that later on in this video. Now, for those of you who are new to filmmaking and video work, there are three things that we need to do to the iPhone to match the qualities of a cinema camera. When we shoot films, we want to try and get a shutter speed of the camera to double that of the frame rate. So if you're shooting 25 frames per second, it's ideal to have a 1/50th of a second shutter speed. Now the issue with an iPhone, if I take this case off, which we'll talk about in a second, when you're shooting outside in the bright daylight, even if you have your ISO way down, the shutter speed will be a lot higher than 1/50th. So the only way to get the shutter speed down normally is to increase the aperture. On the iPhone, the aperture is fixed, so the shutter speed is the primary way we control our exposure. Without anything on the lens, it's hard to do that. And so that's why a variable ND filter is really important. We'll come back to this in a second. The other issue, given that the Apple ProRes 422HQ codec is extremely huge in terms of file size, the internal storage of the iPhone fills up quickly. Even if you have 1 terabyte of internal storage, you'll find that that will fill up quite quickly. And then the issue becomes trying to get all of the data off the phone onto a computer. So that's why we opt for an external SSD when we're recording, and the files write directly to the SSD. So it's super easy to pull that away, plug it into your computer and start editing straight away. The third issue, filming with the iPhone, if you're doing talking heads like this, for example, is obviously audio. If you have your iPhone more than, say, a foot away from you, even though the mics inside the iPhone are incredible, it's going to be good to get a mic on your person. If I tap this here, you can hear that I've got a lavalier on me, and so that's how you can hear me, even though the camera is 1 to 2 meters away from me. So audio, a variable ND to get the exposure down to where we want, and also an external SSD. The last thing that we'll go in and talk about is all of the different accessories and holders for essentially positioning the phone in creative ways to get creative shots. So since having this iPhone 16 Pro Max, I've tried a bunch of different accessories and a couple of different cases for this, but the one that we've landed on is from Pro. This looks like a standard iPhone case. You can see it gives it nice protection. It still has the ability to have a MagSafe adapter or charger on the back, so that's really nice. But you'll see with Pro cases on the front here, there's the option to attach a bunch of different filters onto the top. This case comes with this really great plastic cover. So for the vast majority of time, I just have this case with this cover on. If the lenses get scratched or wrecked, obviously the whole phone becomes useless for the purpose that you brought it, which is filmmaking. So this plastic case pops down if you want to get a quick couple of shots. I always do this if I'm taking standard photos during the day, but you can also completely remove it. It just slides off like that if you want to attach different filters to it. And then Pro also come out with a whole bunch of these little accessories which are filters for the camera. We use two different types. This one here is what's called a variable ND. Now ND stands for neutral density, and that is essentially just sunglasses for your camera if you want to simplify it. A variable neutral density means that you can vary the amount of density of the filter. And what's great about that is when you slide it onto the camera, you have a variety of different exposures that you can achieve just by twisting this filter thread. So when you're outside in the broad daylight, you can stop that down to 5 and try and get your exposure dark enough to keep your shutter speed at 1/50th. The other option is something like this, which is called a black ProMist. I'll show you samples of what this does later on in the video, but again, it just slots straight on, and this allows you to get nice bloomy highlights, and it is quite a common trait for a filmic image. So simply, that's the first thing that I would always do. I would just slide that filter on, and then you have a 4K camera with a variable ND, which allows you to capture that cinematic blur or motion blur using these NDs in a 1/50th of a second if you're shooting in 25 frames per second. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is rig up an SSD so that we can record straight to the SSD. Now Lexar have a SSD called the Lexar Go. Now when you buy these SSDs from Lexar, it comes in a pack, and it comes with a variety of different things like this Lexar USB hub. It also comes with a bunch of right angle adapters like this. These are really great to use, but the only issue with these Lexar right angle adapters is if you try and use it with an iPhone case, you can see it still plugs in, but what happens when you try and push it in, it doesn't go deep enough because it's got this iPhone case on. But what you have to do is actually buy a third-party right angle adapter. If I hold these together, if you can see that the third-party adapter on this side is longer, and so it's also got a bigger reach into the phone. Simply, it just means that you can plug it in while using the case. So this is what that looks like with the SSD plugged into the phone with the case from Polar Pro. That is a very compact cinema camera. I'll start recording so you can see. So if I open up the ND filter and then close it down to 5 stops, you can see I can very easily just control that exposure. And if we're inside and it's still too dark, what I can do is simply slide that off. And as you can see, that brightens it up by another 2 stops. If this all sounds confusing to you in terms of neutral density, just think of it as sunglasses. If it's too bright for your camera, you put sunglasses on. And the cool thing about these sunglasses when you put them on is that you can make them darker if you need to. So that's a really great setup so far. You could go and shoot some awesome content with that. But if you're shooting interviews or actuality or documentary style work where you actually need audio coming in to sync up with the visuals, then you want some sort of audio device on your talent. Now there are 2 ways to do this. You could just record audio separate, in which case this is a perfectly feasible solution. But if you want a really quick turnaround workflow, or you just want to be able to watch your footage back on the phone later on and have that audio synced up nice and clear, then you're going to want to either plug in an audio device directly into the camera or use what's called a USB hub, which allows you to put an audio device receiver on the hub as well as still recording to an external SSD. For this video, I'm recording on a lavalier. So we have all of these packs when we do our professional work. These are UHF transmitters, which you can plug a lavalier mic into, which looks like this. This lavalier mic gets stuck to someone's person or their clothing, and then obviously this plugs in to this pack here. That's a professional way to work. That's how we're recording this video right now. The great thing about an option like this is it allows Tim to monitor the audio. So for example, if I'm moving around too much and there's too much rustle like that, he can just point that out and he can hear it straight away. So that's a great way to work. But that obviously requires investing in external audio gear. And if you're just trying to start a YouTube channel, for example, the simplest way is to buy something like this Hollyland unit right now. So in this tiny little case, you have 2 microphones that can wirelessly transmit audio to the phone or another camera. These are the two microphones here. So they can go on two different people. And then you've also got a receiver for the phone, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you have a receiver for another camera, which you can actually take a 3.5mm jack out of and plug into your camera's microphone input. So just to show you all of the options with the setup, you can take this receiver and plug it into your phone. The only issue that we have right now is an iPhone only has one USB-C port. So you'd have to unplug your SSD and then plug in your receiver into the side here. So you can see that powers up, and that is receiving signal from this microphone now. Now, if you do want to make the most of simply just plugging in this audio receiver into the phone and recording into the phone, you don't have to record at the highest quality codec inside the phone, which will allow you to record much longer inside the phone without having an external SSD. For our use case, we want to record the highest quality codec possible, which is Apple ProRes 422HQ. But unfortunately, that does mean we need an external SSD. So what we're going to do is use this Lexar USB-C hub. This comes with the Lexar Go, and we can simply plug the Lexar Go into the hub like that. And then we can plug the audio receiver from Hollyland into this little slot here. So the next thing, we obviously need to somehow attach it to the back of the phone and then plug it in. Unfortunately, I have misplaced the right angle adapter, which allows me to essentially plug that in nice and compact like that. So just for the case of this example and to show you another solution, what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of tape. This is called Joe's sticky stuff tape. If you're in the film industry, you'll be familiar with this. It's essentially a sticky tape that can be removed quite easily without any residue. I'm just going to pop that there, and then this is going to attach directly onto the phone. And then you can go ahead and use any USB-C to USB-C cable. This one's quite long, but you could find a much smaller cable. This plugs directly into the hub, and then the receiver goes into the phone. So that's the unit there. So in my opinion, that is a very compact and versatile setup. It's incredible to have all of that in one compact package. And not only that, if you're sitting down to shoot some content, let's say an interview, and you're worried about the phone battery running out, this setup can also receive power via a USB-C bank or even wall power. So I can have that on a tripod. I don't have to worry about the battery dying. I don't have to worry about the card filling up. And I know I've got synced audio. So shortly we will get into some camera tests and audio tests. But the last thing I want to talk about is the ability to rig this up in a variety of different ways. The most common solution is just to have an iPhone clamp, such as this one. This is a Neewer clamp. It's an SP02 model. There'll be a link in the description. This simply just clamps over the camera like this. The thing I like about this is you can push it down with your fingers and then use this to lock it. So it's a lot more sturdy than a traditional clamp that just opens via a spring. So that's very sturdy. The great thing about this clamp is you can open this lock and adjust the horizon, which is super handy. You can have it sat down on a surface and you can still adjust the horizon as needed, and then that just locks down. I've got a ball head tripod here, which takes all of your standard Arca Swiss style tripod receivers that can lock into the ball head. So now I have a camera on a tripod, and obviously with a ball head, I can move this around. And again, if the horizon's off with the tripod, you can then just adjust the horizon. You can also tilt from here, so you can get a variety of different angles from this camera. So you can get a top down quite easily as well. Not only can it slide into a tripod, it also has some thread mounts on the bottom. These are the two most common sizes you'll see with filmmaking equipment. And then you can get other accessories like this little Manfrotto tripod, and I can screw that into the base here. And now I have a mini tripod for the phone. You imagine if you're at a cafe, for example, and just trying to capture some content for a YouTube channel, you can set that down on the table right in front of you, and you've got a beautiful image quality coming out of such a compact package. And just remember, this USB-C cable can be a lot smaller. You just find one that's not dangling like this, and that will obviously make it even more compact. Because this Neewer baseplate is so solid, you can actually screw this to a variety of different spots. So if we come over here, if you really wanted to, for example, you could screw it into this piece of wood, and then you have a really great top-down shot just sitting there. You could screw it to the wall if you wanted a camera sort of sitting up on the wall there. As you can see, you're only really limited by your imagination with a base plate like this. But to get this shot right here with any of our other cameras would just be a whole thing. You'd have to get your drills out, your saws out, rig up some kind of wooden frame and attach that on the wall there. But because it's an iPhone, because it's light, it's very compact, you can stick this thing in areas where you wouldn't be able to get other cameras. And that's why we love using it. So this clamp really does open up a whole lot of options. It also has a cold shoe mount on top if you have like a little LED light, or if you wanted to put a small shotgun style mic that routes in, you could also do that. The way we've also been using it recently is with this suction mount. So this is a great little suction mount that sits to the windscreen of the car, and then this attaches, which we'll show you in a second, a sample shot of that. So just to summarize, the rigging options for an iPhone are incredible. Okay, so let's get into some real world examples using this setup. I'm going to attach this camera on top of the URSA camera that Tim's filming on right now. Because it's quite a dark room, I'm just going to use this ProMist filter. It's not adding any ND to the lens or neutral density to the lens. It simply just adds a little bit of creaminess to the highlights and reduces the contrast a little bit. I'm still using the SSD and the audio receiver. I'm going to grab one of these mic transmitters and just clip it onto my top. So that can just sit there in the middle. And just to show you what I'm going to attach this to, we've just rigged a mount, and that is going to sit on this device here. All right, so we've rigged up the iPhone just above the camera. This is a sample of the URSA G2 with a really nice cine lens and an external wireless audio pack. Just a reminder, this is the audio that you're hearing right now. This is a Deity Theos transmitter. It's recording 32-bit float internally into this pack, and I'm using a wireless Lav Pro that's rigged up just here on my chest. As you can hear and see, this is the image. But now let's switch over to the iPhone. So now I'm recording on the iPhone, and I'm recording audio directly from this little microphone here, which is the Hollyland Lark MS2. So this is a tiny little microphone clipped onto my shirt, receiving through the USB-C hub of the Lexar, and I'm also recording Apple ProRes 422HQ externally onto the Lexar Go. So this is the iPhone image, and now back to the URSA. This is the URSA image. Now back to the iPhone image. If you're just purely pixel peeping, of course you can tell that it's different, but for what you get in the iPhone and the fact that it's a phone, it's pretty incredible to see. Okay, so we're outside now, and this is an example of holding the iPhone on the Manfrotto tripod as like a selfie stick, and I've got the audio coming in from the Hollyland mic. You can see it's just really easy to pull it out. The autofocus on the iPhone is great for this application, and if you're just doing walking and talking, this is what that would look like. Timbo in the background. Just for a bit of fun, we've rigged up the iPhone on this car mount. This is a triple suction mount, so it provides a lot more stability than just a single mount. You can buy single mounts, but I think if you're really trying to get a solid connection, you want a 3-point mount. But you can see here, given the size of the iPhone, you don't need a huge rig. you can have this tiny little rig and put it in all sorts of different spots on the car and get some really engaging shots. So I'm just going to go for a quick drive just to show you as an example. But you can see we've got one mount on the window and two on the body of the car, and the iPhone is shooting through the window to give it a little bit of interest in the foreground with this window. And I'm using this microphone here. Again, the same microphone straight into the iPhone. So we'll just go for a quick drive, let's test it out, and you'll see the results. Now obviously for this setup, I wouldn't drive down a massive highway going 100 kilometers an hour, but just as reference, you can see that it's a very viable way to get some creative shots. And I think that is just the beauty of using an iPhone inside a professional workflow, because you can get an extra shot like this that you might cut into your wider commercial project. And because it's just a quick cut, no one's going to know that it's any different, but it's the ability to quickly get a variety of different shots that is the beauty. You're really only limited by your imagination as to the ways that you can mount a phone. Because it's so small, so compact, you can get a clamp like this, a suction cup, you could put it on a tripod. You could put a clamp on a tree branch if you really wanted to. So it allows us to get insert shots that we'd never be able to get with the likes of a big heavy cinema rig like the URSA. To rig that URSA on the side of the car, you're talking about a mount that's like this big and obviously draws a lot of attention, but you could drive through town and get 5 or 6 different shots just with this, and no one would blink an eyelid at what's going on here. It just looks like a big phone mount that you would normally have on your dashboard anyway. So now we've talked about all of the rigging options for the phone. I just want to show you the Blackmagic camera app. This is the app that we use to record all of the content using the phone. Once we open that up, you'll get this interface. You can swipe down on the phone to reveal a full screen without any data. Swipe down again. Up the top, if you're familiar with cinema cameras or even the Blackmagic series of cameras, it's very similar to that. Down the bottom left, you have your histogram, which is your exposure of the scene. The bottom right has your audio, and then in the center, you have your SSD data readout. So in this case, we've got 685 gigabytes left on our external SSD. Now I won't go through every feature on the Blackmagic camera app because that'll take a long time. Maybe that's for another video. But the key things I just want to point out is up the top under shutter speed. So our shutter speed is 1/50th. Now that is because next to it, we have our FPS, our frames per second, and that is 25. So 25 frames per second is what you're watching right now. It's just standard motion. So because the frames per second is 25, we want to just make sure that that shutter speed is 1/50th. And obviously that lock button locks it in place so it's not going to move and automatically change the exposure. What I like to do with the ISO is have it as low as possible for any given scene. If I'm outside, I want it at 54 if I'm shooting on the 24mm lens. I can increase the ISO just by dragging this wheel here. But again, I like to have it at 54. And then when I'm outside, if it's still too bright at 54, that's when we add the ND filter onto the lens. WB is white balance. I generally lock that at 5/600. That is daylight balanced. But if you're at night, for example, inside, you'll have quite warm lights, often around 3200. And that's where you can use one of these presets, such as tungsten, and you can manually adjust the white balance if you want. You could also do auto. I don't like to use auto. I like to be in control of that and lock it at 5/600. Now the other key features of this app is the lens. You can jump between the 0.5 lens, which you can see here. I'll just point this back at Tim. You can also have the 24mm lens. And then we can go to the 120mm lens, which is a little bit crazy and ridiculous. I wish they had a 13, a 24, and a 50mm. I've never really used the 120. It's just a little bit too long for my liking. The 24mm lens is the highest quality lens. The 13 and the 120, you'll see a noticeable image quality loss. And one thing I will say is just try to avoid the zooming, which is this button here. When you go 2, 4, and 8, it's actually digitally zooming. It's not using the lenses to zoom. So always just avoid that. And if you do want to punch in, go to the 120mm lens, the ×5, or the 24. Again, the 48mm is actually just digitally punched in to that 24mm lens. Couple other things to keep in mind. Right now, we've got image stabilization on, which is extreme. One thing to keep in mind is when you do have it on a tripod, just turn stabilization off. Because sometimes the stabilization fights against the tripod and you get some weird little wobbles. I've noticed that for a couple of shots. One thing I do have is I've got a LUT, which is a lookup table, which is essentially a preset that allows me to see my image not in this state here. This is currently flat, which is the Apple log color space. All great cameras shoot in what's called a flat image profile or a flat color space. In this case, we've got a logarithmic color space. To view it properly, we want to view it through that preset, which is a LUT, which will give me this look. In settings, you can load your own lookup tables under LUTs here, LUTs, and I've used a LUT called the One LUT. You can buy that online, and it converts it from Apple log into RE709, which is trying to make it look like an RE camera. Before we move on, I just want to point out 2 key menu settings for this particular setup. So under settings, we want to go to audio and just ensure that the audio source is in fact the wireless microphone. The wireless microphone again is this Hollyland receiver using this microphone here. The other setting we want to choose is media. We want to ensure that the camera is writing to this external SSD. So if we go to save clips to, we want to choose files and then click on this button here and navigate to the Lexar drive. You can create your own folder for every project. In this case, we're using YouTube. I'm going to click open, and now all of my files are saving to the SSD in a folder called YouTube. The great thing about this is at the end of production, all I need to do is unplug the SSD, plug it into the computer, start editing straight away, or obviously backup. Finally, the last menu setting to really pay attention to is the record menu. Under codec, this is going to be probably your primary setting. We're using the highest quality codec, which is Apple ProRes 422 HQ. You can choose a variety of ProRes flavors, 422, 422 LT, and 422 Proxy. You can also shoot H.265 and H.264. Okay, so that's a lot of information. If you are new to filmmaking, don't stress about all of those details. If you are a professional camera operator, you understand all of this, which is amazing. This is just here to show you that the features do exist to be able to include this into a professional workflow. But again, if you're just starting out, just have fun with it. Just go to the camera, hit record, plug it into the computer, see what happens. And then every time you make a new video, just iterate a little bit, learn a little bit every single time. If you don't use the Blackmagic camera app for anything else, one amazing feature is the remote camera control. What this allows you to do is use another iPhone. For example, I'm going to use Tim's iPhone now. I'm not going to show you the full setup, but essentially I can access this phone using Tim's phone. On Tim's phone, I can simply just choose the available cameras on the network. I've got the Blackmagic camera app open on Tim's iPhone, and I just connect to it using the remote password. In this case, the remote password is 12345. Once I connect, I can now see the image from this camera here. It's hard for you to see, but the image from this camera is now being displayed. And this is amazing if you have this, for example, mounted up on the roof for whatever reason, a top-down shot. I can then use this phone to monitor the image coming out of that phone. For us to have that same feature set on our big cinema rig, we would have to use this whole thing here. This is a case with our DJI wireless monitor. We've got this external screen that has to be plugged in with a V-mount. We've got to mount this massive thing to the back of the camera. Now obviously they exist for a reason, and on a professional set there's a reason you use gear like this. But it just blows my mind that With these two phones here, you essentially have close to the same feature set as what you do with, no joke, probably over $100,000 worth of gear that we use on a regular basis. So that concludes this video. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to us ramble about the iPhone. We love it, and I hope that it's brought some insight into how you could incorporate it into your filmmaking if that's what you so desire. I think if I was getting into this, I would simply just buy the case, and then I would buy a 2 to 5 stop ND, a variable ND from Polar Pro, and I wouldn't worry about the SSD initially. I would experiment with all the different codecs, experiment to writing it to the internal storage of the iPhone. As soon as you hit that bottleneck, which I imagine will come sooner than later, then you can invest in one of those SSD enclosures. The only thing to keep in mind if you're using another type of SSD, not the Lexar Go, is that other types of SSDs don't come with the USB hub. So if you're trying to record external audio with something like these Hollylands, and you have another form of SSD from a different brand, you will need a USB hub to join them together. And I haven't tested any other USB hubs, so I can't confirm whether those USB hubs that you're using will work with both of those devices, the audio receiver and the SSD. That's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, please comment and subscribe and like and all of those good YouTube things to tell the algorithm that this video is valuable for somebody. So peace out, guys. We'll see you in the next one.